I'm delighted to be able to talk to you all this morning on the topic of how virtual engagement can affect social and political change. It's a topic that I feel very strongly about. As we start to think about this question, I'd like to show you some snapshots of different friends' Facebook pages. Because on any given day, I can expect to see posts ranging from an engagement with austerity measures across Europe, concerns over the rising costs of education for students, issues to do with climate change, but also criticism levelled at the mainstream media as well as governments for being too slow to act. Finally, a post on human rights violations. And this particular friend has actually used Facebook to put out a call to action, asking other users to repost this message or in fact consider signing Amnesty International's petition online. But so what? I'm left asking myself what these posts will actually achieve, if anything. The skeptics amongst us here today, and I'm sure there are many here, might well argue that sites such as Facebook and Twitter don't really achieve anything in the physical world. That at best they operate as platforms for Slactivists, those people who hide behind their iPads thinking they're changing the world, to rant and rave in a fairly self-indulgent way. I'm sure we've all got friends who occasionally do that. Of course, none of us would. But so what? What do they actually achieve? I'd like to now look at the 2011 Arab Spring as a case study, because the Arab Spring was a really powerful moment in history which has been linked to, I guess, social media affecting some kind of change. Certainly critics do argue that the role of social media was overstated or perhaps even misrepresented the level of discontent in the region. And certainly social media wasn't the only form of communication that had a role to play. But it did have a role. And it certainly did allow people on the streets to coordinate their activities, to communicate, but also, and this is a really important message, to share what was happening with the rest of the world. It's a really key idea that's explored in Ibrahim Hamdan's documentary Images of Revolution, which in itself, in being commissioned by Al Jazeera and broadcast on a range of social media sites like YouTube, operates as a means for sharing ideas with the rest of the world. It talks about how everyday people operated as citizen journalists and were able to use digital formats, being transferable formats, to share stories, images and videos online. I'd like to now show you the opening sequence from Hamdan's film to further explore this idea.
الصورة يمكن تكون سلاح بالفعل. نحن لاحظنا أن الصورة معناها أصبحت تغير أنظمة.
الصورة اليوم صار عندها تأثير الرصاصة. تنقل فكرة في أجزاء من الثانية.
قيمة كل الاحتجاجات الموجودة في العالم العربي هي أنها أعادت الاعتبار للأدوات التي يمتلكها المواطن، أعادت الاعتبار إلى الصورة.
الشعب التونسي حر، الشعب التونسي ما يموتش، الشعب التونسي العظيم.
والله توقعت انها تتشهر في تونس في الفيسبوك، يعني ما تخيلتش انها توصل للقنوات التلفزية ويحطوها كفاصل يعني بين البرامج، وما تخيلتش.
يا حراركم راكم تحرك.
ناس نعرفهم انا شخصيا، معناها اصدقائي وهيك، لما نقول لهم انا اللي صورت يعني يكونوا مستغربين برشا، معناها انه انسان عادي جدا انه يصور حاجه هكايا استثنائيه.
Hamdan's film quite powerfully tells a story of how everyday people operated almost as citizen journalists in sharing images, videos and stories with the rest of the world. And because they were in transferable formats, news crews were also able to share these stories. And during the Arab Spring, we saw quite a powerful relationship emerge between the mainstream media and social media, as conventional news agencies, be they across radio, television or print, started to pick up the stories that were being expressed on sites such as Facebook and Twitter. Recently, in the case of the shooting of Pakistani schoolgirl Malala Yousafzai, we've again seen a close relationship between an established news agency, being the BBC, and social media. In fact, it was the BBC who originally commissioned Malala's blog, which told of life in her village in Pakistan and talked about some of the social justice issues that she experienced daily, such as the closing down of schools and restrictions on education for women. After the shooting of Malala, there was a lot of public outcry on social media sites. And this outcry was again picked up by the mainstream media. So we saw a really powerful relationship emerge between conventional media agencies and, I guess, citizen journalists who were posting their stories online. So if we return to this question of how virtual engagement can affect social and political change, change that is real and measurable in the physical world, I would argue that there are three key ways. First of all, social media can start a conversation like we're having here today. It can raise our awareness of issues and educate us about things we might not be aware of, be it the general strike in Madrid or the rising costs of education for students in Quebec. Secondly, social media can allow us to rally others, to communicate with those who share a similar passion or a similar concern. And that rallying might be linked to action in the physical world, so a march on government, calls to sign a petition such as the Amnesty International example I provided, or in fact a call to donate money to a worthy cause. Finally, social media can enable all of us, each and every one of us, to become content creators, to tell our stories from our own cities and villages, to upload pictures and videos and images and share them not just with each other but the rest of the world via social media sites and also via conventional news agencies who may pick up our stories, such as in the case of Malala Yousafzai. Finally, I would argue, however, that all of these conversations online, all of our virtual engagement has to be linked to a real outcome if it's going to achieve any change. This outcome might be the collapse of a regime, such as in Egypt, a change of government, and we've seen groups such as Get Up work very strongly to educate us on issues that are or are not being tackled by our political parties, a boycott, or even something as simple as changes to the way we behave or the way that we see the world. Environmental campaigns online, for example, have really shifted the way we think about things like water use, our use of energy on a daily basis. All of these are tangible outcomes. So when virtual engagement via social media works well, it complements physical action. I would argue that social media can never replace the sheer force of people descending on the street, and clearly in the case of Egypt, that was a very powerful moment when so many people protested on the streets. But when it does work well, social media augments physical action. It works alongside it. It complements it. And to that end, all of us might begin to think about our uses of social media and the way that we engage online, and to use these platforms as something for the creation of something far more important than just idle noise. Thank you.